I'm going to hand you over to Dr. Martin Stephen.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for chiming in. Can I just say that we've sort of divided this webinar up into schools and colleges. They are different. They do offer, in some cases, very different choices, but there are also many similarities. And I'm sure that much of what I'm going to say about the schools sector, Julian will also say about the college sector. Perhaps the place to start when talking about the schools sector is that the only available schools in the United Kingdom are the independent fee-paying schools. It is virtually impossible to attend a state school in the United Kingdom. Many of these schools, the independent schools, go back a very long way. The three schools in which I was very privileged to be the head, between them had been in existence for over 1400 years. St. Paul's was founded in 1509, the Manchester Grammar School in 1515, and the Perse School in 1615. But history doesn't always equate with quality. So please, my first bit of advice would be, look at the actual school as it is now. You're sending the most precious thing you have, your child, or the most precious thing you have, if you're a candidate yourself listening in, to a school that will teach you in the present time. You're not attending a school 100 years ago or 200 years ago. So yes, fine about the history. It can add a significant amount actually to what the school offers, but don't be totally dominated by the history. And indeed, some of the very best schools, I'm thinking of Marlborough College, Haileybury College, were only founded relatively recently, by which I mean, say, 150 years ago. And indeed, there are a number of new independent schools in the United Kingdom, which are very successful. The UK education system, we would like to think, is one of the best in the world, but it is actually very complicated. And part of the reason for this webinar, and indeed the book, is to try and unravel a little bit of that complexity. One of the things that confuses people with regard to schools often is this phrase, charitable status. Now, basically, schools in the United Kingdom, the majority of them are what we in England call charities. They do not exist to make money. Any profit they make, in theory at any rate, is fed back into the education of the pupils. And the majority of the schools in the United Kingdom, independent schools, fee-paying schools, have charitable status. But here again, merely having charitable status does not mean that this is necessarily a good school. There are a number of schools which are registered as companies, trading companies, who are just as good as the schools with charitable status. So again, charitable status is not something that you allow largely to influence any choice you make. It really isn't part of the significant offer that you will find in the school. I'm not saying it can be ignored, but it's not an important issue. If you want the kite mark for quality of schools in the United Kingdom, there are three organisations above all, membership of which means that you are guaranteed a degree of quality. The best known is HMC, the Headmasters or Headmistresses Conference. There's also the Girls' School Association and IAPS, the Independent Association of Preparatory Schools. Now, these three organisations contain not just the majority of the very best independent schools in the UK, but also they do have quality mark on entry. You can't be a member of those organisations unless you reach certain standards. So whereas I would personally not be too excited about charitable status or non-charitable status, I would be rather more interested in whether the school was a member of one of these leading organisations. I'll repeat them again: HMC, Headmasters and Headmistresses Conference, Girls' School Association, and IAPS, the Independent Association of Preparatory Schools. Again, there are very good schools that are not in membership of those organisations, but you can guarantee a degree of quality if the school is. One of the things that one has to come to terms with if you're applying to a UK independent school is the very confusing language. For instance, you see this most simply in the name of the head. I was called a Headmaster on 2 occasions. Other heads of UK independent schools go by the name of Warden or by Rector. Indeed, Abbey College has a Master. Again, these terms are largely meaningless. You can ignore them. A Headmaster or a principal are mostly the same the whole world over. Don't be confused by the language. And by the way, once you explore these schools in even greater detail, the language can become even more confusing. I do not know, despite being head of it for 7 years, why the sixth form, i.e. the classes for the 16 to 18-year-olds at St. Paul's School, London, are divided into the lower 8th and the upper 8th. There is no reason for it whatsoever, except it dates back about 400 years. Again, be careful about the language, but don't let it confuse you. Recent changes in schools are that not all, but the vast majority of UK independent schools have now become co-educational and moved away, whereas a lot of them were basically all boys schools. A majority of schools in membership of the leading organisations are now co-educational, though there are wonderful schools that offer all boy or all girl education. And again, this is down to parental choice. You look what's on offer, you decide what is best for the individual child. I've been asked to talk a bit about the student experience. Well, the answer is the student experience is usually widely different for every individual child who comes into a UK school. But if I can go into 1 or 2 generalizations, one of the things to be aware of is that if you are sending a child or if you are coming to a UK independent school, you really do need to look for a guardian or somewhere where that child can stay, perhaps in holidays, but certainly in exeats. Now there's another word. An exeat is something that happens perhaps once every 3, once every 4 weeks in the boarding schools, where pupils are allowed to go home for the weekend. Now, if the child is to be left in the school on their own, it can be pretty miserable. And in the ideal world, you have a friend or a relative or somebody who can act as a guardian to your child and look after them on the occasions when the school is largely closed. Be a little careful about the organisations that offer actually professional guardians, only in the sense that you should really talk to and interview yourself anybody who is acting as a guardian for your child. The UK education system experience is occasionally very different for a child coming in from overseas. In particular, one of the areas which surprises some students is the focus on what we call extra or co-curricular activities: sport, art, music, drama, debating, any number of activities that are on offer in the school, as well as the academic tuition. Now, these extracurricular activities are very important. They are very much part of the culture of the school, and if the applicant to a school can show that they do have an interest outside of the classroom, it will undoubtedly help them to get a place. But be warned, it will not be 24 hours in the classroom if you come to a UK independent school. You will be expected to take part in sport, in music, in drama, or indeed choose from a whole range of activities. And by the way, I should emphasize that having taken part in these activities is a tremendous plus point if later on you are applying to a university in the UK or indeed in the USA. One thing to be very aware of in choosing a school or looking into school is the proportion of overseas students. Now, this can be an area, as I'm sure Julian will say later on, where the college system has an advantage. But what you're looking for in the independent school that you choose for your child is a mixture of nationalities, and absolutely crucial, you're looking for English being the common spoken language among students. Now, if a school, for instance, has over 50% of its intake from overseas, very often you might find that, for instance, the Chinese student will spend their whole time at school talking Chinese to other Chinese students. Now, that is not the reason the majority of parents send their child to UK independent school. One of the great assets of coming to a UK independent school is the capacity to speak English as the English speak it. So be a little wary of the proportion of overseas students in a school, but not because of the nationalities or the race or anything else, simply because you are looking to see that English is the spoken language among the students in that school. You will find, or the student will find, that there is quite a focus in the UK independent sector on independent thinking. The child is not told what to do all the time. This is one of the reasons why UK education is such a wonderful preparation for university, because the child is actually encouraged to do independent thinking, to be resilient, to work some things out for their own. So your child will not be told everything to do. They have to get used to a little degree of independence, sometimes more independence than they may have had in the schooling in their home country. Having talked to literally thousands of overseas students who come to schools in the UK, it is very interesting. Here am I talking about academic results, pastoral care. The one topic that comes up most often in the students I've talked to is actually food. Now, all I will say about that is that English food is not nearly as bad as sometimes it is meant to be, but spoken as, but it is helpful if you are sending your child to a UK school to prepare them a little bit for the change in their diet. I will say no more. It's worth also looking to see whether the school has a program to introduce the student to the culture of the country they are in. We live increasingly in a global, in an international world. Understanding other people's culture is going to be even more crucially important to the success of a child in the world of work. And the best schools will actually take time out to teach that child, their students, about the culture in which they are living. They will take them to the Tower of London. They will take them to the big sites in England. They will show them Big Ben. They will talk about the House of Commons. This isn't an attempt to convert the student. It's simply a part of the widespread belief in English education that cultural awareness is actually maybe not as important as academic achievement, but a very important part of a child's education. This may sound a very stupid thing to comment, but mobile phones, cell phones, whatever. Many students who I have talked to have very great difficulty in being parted from their mobile phone. I think it's fair to say that the majority of UK schools will put pretty severe restrictions on the use of a mobile phone, particularly in the classroom. It can be a shock to some students. Bear in mind, when you are choosing the subjects that your child wishes to study, that often a pupil's command of English is much better in spoken English in the first instance than it is in the written English. So I would think very carefully if you are choosing A-level subjects and look, if indeed it is A-level or indeed the International Baccalaureate that your school studies, look very carefully at the extent to which that exam, that subject, requires the child to write essays in English. It can take quite a long while to bring the standard of written English up to the same standard as spoken English. So look at the A-level or the IB subjects and actually choose fairly carefully the ones that require large amounts of essay writing. Talking about the student experience, it is normal in UK secondary schools, though again, this can vary hugely. It is normal for the student to spend the early part of their time at 13, 14, 15 years old in a dormitory, sleeping in a room with 8 or 9 other students, and then moving into a bed set. Though, again, I have to say there are more variations of this than there are schools in the country. Some schools put children, Eton, for instance, puts a child in a room of their own right from the start. Other schools have a study, in other words, a work area, where the child does their work and relaxes socially, but also they still sleep in a dormitory. Just check what the living arrangements are. The odds are that any child will adapt to those arrangements. Independent schools are usually actually very happy places, but it can be helpful for the child to know what the sleeping and the study arrangements are actually before they take up a place. One other thing that is important to emphasize if you are preparing somebody to come to the UK, and I'm sure Julian will have something to say about this, is that the UK education system encourages the asking of questions. Students in a UK class are expected to challenge the teacher, to ask questions, to put a hand up if they don't understand. In other words, it is not simply a one-way process being in a class in an English school. It is not the teacher standing on the podium lecturing the child. It is a two-way process. That student is expected to want to be involved in that lesson, to ask questions, and indeed to challenge the teacher on the, we hope, rare occasion when the teacher is saying something that the student does not agree with. The role of the teacher in the UK is not just to impart knowledge, it is to stir and to stimulate and encourage creativity and independent thinking. Again, also, not so much a word of warning, but a word of advice. Many young people who come over to the UK, or an increasing number, are not necessarily looking to move on to a university in the UK. Many are looking to move on to a university, particularly in the USA, and the American universities, in schools at least, are becoming more and more popular. It is actually worth inquiring, very important to inquire, whether the school that you are sending somebody to, or that a child is attending, actually has a system for preparing children for entry to American universities. I have been fairly heavily involved in preparing children for entry to American universities, and it can be, I'm afraid to say, an absolute nightmare. If you are thinking, or if a place at an American university is part of your aim, for a young person, check that the school has a system to, check that the school knows about the entry system to American universities. I said earlier on that the UK education system could be quite complicated. Believe you me, it's nowhere near as complicated as applying to an American university. One other thing that perhaps you need to be aware of, and this will apply right across the sector, is that a student in the UK, a tremendous amount of our education system is based on trust. Students are not checked up on an hourly basis. They're expected to do the right thing. They're expected to do their work on time and all the rest of it. There's a lot of trust in the UK education system. A final word before we move on to Julian about admissions. There's one absolute rule. The good schools are oversubscribed. It is a competitive entry. And if a school offers you a place on the spot, if you go to some educational fair and the school will sign you up there and then, that is a school to be avoided. Schools that will actually let your child in or let a child in without entry tests, without interviews, are basically having to struggle for their numbers. So expect the school you're applying to be oversubscribed, and this leads into one other bit of advice: never only apply to one school. A normal number, an average number of schools that parents would apply to would probably be 3. No, there's probably no need for more than that, but don't ever put, as we would say in England, put all your eggs into one basket. Don't ever just apply to only one school. Admission will normally be through an admissions officer or a registrar, and each school will have its own individual entry process. It will normally consist of an examination or an interview, and the interview nowadays is much more likely to be conducted over Zoom as we are now. Now, I'm sure many of the people listening into this webinar will be very experienced broadcasters on Zoom. What I find very interesting is, and I have conducted a large number of interviews myself, is the number of students who interview very well in person, but interview badly over Zoom. And the only bit of extra tuition that I would advise you to actually go through for a young person applying to a UK school who is going to be interviewed virtually by Zoom or by Teams or whatever, is to give them a little bit of training in how to conduct an interview. A surprising number of young people, however IT literate they are not good when it comes to being interviewed. That the classic mistake is to wait to be asked something. And actually a little bit of experience of being asked questions in front of a screen is no bad thing for a child. Bear in mind that what the UK school is looking for is not necessarily the child to have the right answers. They are looking for the child's brain to be working. Very often you will be asked some questions, both at interview and in written papers, to which there is no right answer. This isn't right or wrong. It is simply that the school wants to see that that child has a brain that is working. The analogy that I would use is here with my watch. When most of us look at a watch, we look at the watch face to see the time. The school isn't looking at the watch face when they interview or test your child all the time. They're looking at the workings. They're lifting the cover off and they're looking to see the wheels turning. They want to see your child thinking. There is no right or no wrong answer to a lot of the questions. These schools are very different. They have history, as I've said, that goes back hundreds of years, and it is always worth the person who is applying spending time on the website, actually finding out about the special features of that school. This issue of language can block some students when they meet things like sports they haven't ever heard of. And that's my final bit of advice. The school that is looking at a young person coming over wants somebody who wants to do new things. There will be sports, there will be activities, there will be all sorts of things on offer at that school, which the child, the young person will not have experienced before. Those schools want somebody who will be involved. They want somebody who will not be frightened by the fact that there is a game called fives played at a number of schools. By the way, if you want an illustration of the occasional idiocy of the English system, the sport, which is kind of sort of tennis, but not played with your hand as the racket, is known as fives, yet it can only be played by 2 or 4 people. Explain that if you can. Nobody's ever explained it to me. But you don't need to be put off by the fact that the school plays fives. What the school wants and what they're most excited by is the child who says, I've never heard of that, I'd love to have a go. I could obviously talk a lot more about schools, but that's why Julian and I wrote the book. And now, if I may, I'll hand over to Julian to tell you about the college sector.
Martin, thank you so much. And I think we really are privileged to hear Martin talk. Martin has extraordinary experience, one of the most experienced head teachers in the UK, who he's run 3 of the finest schools here. So it's great to hear the advice that we're getting from Martin this morning about schools. My background is a little different. So my background, I've come through the 6th form college sector. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about that sector, a little bit of the contrast to the school sector, the more traditional sector perhaps, and talk you through some of the features, what the 6th form colleges are like, what they offer, and also what their purpose is, or how they may see their purpose, just to enable you to get a bit of a distinction between the college offering and the traditional school offering. I like to run a presentation when I'm talking, so I hope you can see that. It helps me to structure my ideas that I'm talking to you about. The first thing I'd like to show you is just the book that we wrote together, and just to give you a little bit more from my perspective about why we wrote the book. It was actually Martin's initiative, because it struck him, and I agree fully, that, as he mentioned, it's a complicated business coming from another country into the UK, into the system that's been around for hundreds of years, and trying to navigate through what is the right school or college for you, or if you're a parent, for your child, or perhaps if you're an agent, how do you advise? And we felt there was a lack of perhaps independent information to cover all of the landscape, if you like, in a very readable, concise way. So that was our purpose in writing this book. So I do hope if you do take a look at it, it provides information and it fulfills its objective, which is to help you navigate. So the sixth form college, well, first of all, just to give you an idea about what the name means, it's a name that derives from an old naming system for the years in high school or secondary school. So you used to call the first year of high school Form 1. And so you get to Form 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So when you get to Form 6, you're in the sixth form. So that's where the name derives. Slightly confusingly, there were 2 years of the sixth form. So they divided it into lower six and upper six. So that was the term when I went to school. We now call those years 12 and year 13 because we count, like in many other countries now, from the beginning of school, from the primary up to secondary. So that's where the name comes from, just in case you have any confusion about what that term means. But what it reveals is most of the children that go to the sixth form colleges are going into year 12 and into year 13. That means they are aged 16 and over. So that's a very big difference in terms of what colleges provide for education and how they perhaps might feel to a new student or new child going in. Therefore, because we're focused really on year 12 and year 13, largely, the examinations that are taught for at that age are the A-level exams, called advanced level, which is the traditional curriculum that students will take in the UK over the age of 16. There is, of course, a fantastic alternative, the International Baccalaureate, although there are fewer colleges that offer that as a year 12 and 13 alternative. Increasingly, some children actually join into year 13, so they spend 1 year in a college to do a university preparation course. So this qualification, the International Foundation course, is explicitly a university preparation course. The A-level and the IB are longer, and they will allow you entry to any university in the world. IB is shorter and more tailored to specific universities. Increasingly, sixth form colleges have also introduced courses for slightly younger children. So that's the GCSE course, which is the examinations that students take before the sixth form. So in year 11, typically, before they go into the year 12 and 13 of the sixth form college. The reason I mention this is because it is a relatively new development for sixth form colleges for them to take on curricula for the slightly younger children, aged 14, 15, and 16. And there are two broad kinds of GCSE course. And I know there was a question beforehand, so thank you for the person who put the question through. The question was simply, what is the difference between a 1 year GCSE course and a 2 year GCSE course? Well, the standard program in the UK is to study quite a broad spectrum of GCSE subjects over 2 years. That is the culmination of the year 11, the year 10 and the year 11. You do a broad range, perhaps 8 subjects, but perhaps more like 9, 10, maybe even 11 subjects. It's a broad range, deliberately covering some of the core subjects like maths and English. You'll do some science. Maybe you do all 3 sciences, biology, chemistry, physics. You'll do some humanities subjects, history, geography, a language, perhaps French, maybe Spanish. You might do art and design and music. So you can see you've got a broad range. That's the traditional route through for the British education system at year 10 and year 11. What colleges have done, largely in response to demand from overseas parents who would prefer to see their child come for a shorter time before the sixth form, the GCSE time, the colleges have responded to that by putting on 1 year courses or even 1.5 year courses, sometimes called 18-month courses. So the difference is quite simply that is tailored for the international market, if that makes sense. So for children coming in who haven't got the 2 years, maybe they are 15 or 16 already, Because it's a one-year program, the curriculum is modified. As you might imagine, you can't do the same quantity of work in 1 year that traditionally the schools teach in 2. So the simple difference on a one-year course, there are fewer subjects taught, and they will tend to be whittled down to perhaps some of the core maths, English, maybe a science or 2, maybe 1 humanities, maybe history or economics perhaps. So it's a much smaller curriculum. That, of course, limits to some degree what the child can do at A level, unless they've chosen the GCSEs exactly to the same A level. And for some universities later on, they would question, why have you only got 5 GCSEs? Those would be the very top, very selective universities. Okay, so let's move on to some of the features. I've mentioned this already, age. Because the children join largely at year 12, they are largely 16 years and over. So it's an older teenage cohort in a sixth form college. In schools, of course, schools will have year 12 and year 13, usually. Some schools end at year 11, but most go to 12 and 13. So schools have those older children along with the year 7s, 8s, 9s, 10s, and 11, typically. So that's one of the differences. Coming into year 12, if you come into a school, you'll be with younger children, of course. Into a college, you largely be with children of a more narrower age range. So that's something to consider. There's a degree of informality in most colleges compared to schools. Many schools, of course, view the school uniform as a key part of the identity of a child belonging to a school, and rightly so. It's a very important part of building a sense of belonging, of community, and some colleges do the same. However, many colleges do not, and that gives you an indication of how the difference manifests. The children there are a little older, so the colleges think, well, we won't insist on a uniform for those children because we're not trying to fulfill our community aspirations in quite the same way. But what it does to an observer, you look at a college and think, well, it does look different. Older children, not in uniform. Sometimes the teachers are referred to as first names. That's sometimes quite common. And that's often because the college wants the student to be perhaps have a less formal relationship so they can ask the teacher for help about their university application and so on. So these are some of the differences that some colleges choose. There's a key philosophy though, as far as I'm concerned, as a principal myself of a college, and that is we see our job as largely preparing those 16, 17, 18-year-olds for university. And that then feeds back into why some colleges use less formality to allow the child to become a little bit more prepared for the adult education world of university. So in terms of choosing a college, I would think in terms of the facilities and the reputation. I'll mention these things briefly, but underneath it all is going to be the purpose. How does that child get helped with their ambition to move to the next stage? So Martin's alluded to the fact that increasingly students go to universities outside the UK after spending time in the UK. And I know we have many children now applying to the US. So that's another part of the experience. It's not simply preparing for UK university afterwards, it's preparing for university globally, perhaps. So how to choose? So I thought I'd take you through a few things that strike me as being quite important. The quality of the offering, of course, but I would suggest you look a bit further than the league tables. So league tables are a very widely used method for choosing a school or college. Quite understandable. How could you tell if one is better? Well, perhaps look at the results of the children. It gives you some indication, but it's only an indication. And the reason is context. Some schools and some sixth form colleges are academically selective. So, for example, if a college was academically selective and only allowed students to join if they had A star, so that the very top grades, and those colleges exist, then the A-level results that they would get, you'd imagine, will also be similar to that grade, A star, perhaps A, which would be a good outcome for the child. But comparing that college to a college that is not selective, and the outcome doesn't necessarily give you a fair comparison about how good the school is. So it is very difficult with league tables to look past simple hierarchy and making a conclusion that the one on the top is the best. So just bear that in mind. It's one measure to choose, but there is more behind league tables than first meets the eye. There is an issue about context, how students are chosen. Okay, so the other point I'd make about this, I think a good way of looking at the success of a student is also to see where they've gone for the university destination. That's largely, as I mentioned, the rationale for choosing a sixth form college is looking beyond to university. So what I would say is, perhaps if you are looking for progression to a university for medicine, for example, you might want to look at a college and think, well, how successful have the students been for that college in the past? That gives you an indication about the ability, of course, and maybe the selective nature of the college, but it also tells you perhaps how good the college is at preparing the child. Then maybe they've got an expertise in that college that others may not have for that subject, whether it's medicine, architecture, engineering, whatever it happens to be. So that's a way of looking at colleges, is where have students gone after they've left. So that's perhaps something to look at rather than purely league tables. I think it's quite important to, if you can, to have an understanding of what it's actually like. That's very difficult to find out, but do the staff stay? Well, it's probably going to be very difficult for you to find that information out. But if you're on a tour, why don't you ask the person there, how long have you worked here? Is it a good place to work? If you can, just to get a feeling of what the environment is like. And you'd hope it's a positive environment and an energized place where people want to learn and study. And you'll find most schools and colleges are, incidentally. This is another one that I think is quite important. If you know someone who's been to that school or that college, ask them what it was like. It's a very simple thing to do. Word of mouth is the expression that we would use. And I'm always very happy when I talk to a child who's interested in coming to my college, if they know somebody who's already done that, because at least then they're hearing perhaps the reality of life in the college. So a good tip, if you know somebody, or if you're using an education agent, have they placed a child there before? Well, is there a way of maybe your mum speaking to that person's mum? Maybe that's a way of getting a bit more information about that particular institution. And then facilities are important. In the college sector, there's quite a range of facilities. Some of the colleges are in the countryside, in lovely grounds with beautiful facilities, swimming pools even, sports grounds, perhaps a theatre. So some colleges actually look a little like the marvellous traditional boarding schools. Other colleges, perhaps maybe newer ones, are maybe in a city. There are many of these colleges in London, for example, a fabulous opportunity to live in the capital city, a vibrant place to study, but it's going to be very different. The facilities, they may not have a swimming pool in that college. Unlikely for them to have their own pool, not impossible. There are colleges in the centre of London that have them, but it's unlikely. Therefore, think about what you would like, what experience you'd like, because this difference does exist. Okay, good. Martin alluded to the English language as well. I thought I'd briefly mention it. The colleges do have many international students. Some have more than others. It might be something for you to ask about, how to, when you're looking. The key for me is, how does the college deal with English and deal with friendships between nationalities? How do students settle in? And are there specific things colleges do to assist with that? Or do they just let the children find their social groups, which is legitimate, but perhaps if they are engaged in organized activities to help generate new friendship groups? Don't forget, your child might be there for only 2 years. but they'll be joining with many other children joining for 2 years. So there are super opportunities to make friends with children from other countries. But I would be bearing that in mind. To what degree is the English language fundamental? What level is required? And how is your child progressed so their English level keeps improving? And then I think probably I would say the key questions about the college function is, how are they helping students get to university? And I would perhaps ask if you could see examples of the curriculum, if there is one. There might be a university sensitization curriculum. There might be lessons on critical thinking. One of the key skills for university students is how to analyze, solve problems, and not simply recall information. And one of the huge benefits of the UK system is the great value that's placed on that. So is a sixth form helping the child understand this is what lies ahead, and this is how you can prepare yourself for that? So a little bit of university preparation. How do you choose a course? How do you choose a university? How do you choose a country? So ask how that is done and who's giving the advice, just to reassure yourself that there are people in that college who know how to counsel a child on which architecture course would be suitable for them, how they get to medical school outside of the UK, whatever it happens to be. So a couple of last pointers about what to look out for. Some of the things that you should ask, because they do go on. What happens between GCSE and A-level? Will my child be guaranteed, if they're in a sixth form that has a GCSE, are they guaranteed to move forward into the A-level? Or is there a grade criteria? That also can happen between year 12 and year 13. Colleges might do this because they would like to protect their league table position. So they would try to do what they can to ensure the children that move through to year 13 for A-level get good grades. So there may be a conversation in year 12 where a child is told, well, you have to get whatever, A grades or B grades or C grades, whatever it is. But I would ask that question of a college. Do you have a policy about grades required to move between the year groups? If you do not, then that's good. If you do, what is the grade? Because your child therefore needs to be understanding of what's expected of them. And on that, be explicit. What is going to happen if my child isn't hitting the grades that they require for their university, and maybe you require, to allow them to continue? What support mechanisms are in place? How often? How will I know the support is happening? Can I talk to a teacher? Can I email, and so on? Okay, so let me just finish off with the life of the student. Colleges are great places to study, I have to say. My experience of running one is move from being perhaps a child to a young adult. They're making that sort of transition. So it's a fabulous time in their lives to come together as a group, to study together. And I mentioned this before, but I think it's quite a powerful notion. If you do join a sixth form college, you're likely to be joining with other children for the first time as well. Not many will be doing the GCSEs who've been there before. Most students in the sixth form are joining for the first time. And that does seem to foster friendships, because if you consider coming to a new school, you don't know anybody. If you're joining a sixth form college, that's the case for many other children. And that tends to be something that encourages friendships, because those children don't know anybody when they first arrive. So I mentioned, does the college help with the friendship making and the support and so on? So it's something to consider. And there we are. This is really why I work in this sector, because it is a great transition stage for a child's life into adulthood. And the experiences that are offered here in colleges should be grasped with both arms. Take part in new activities. Martin has mentioned this. Life in the UK school and college sector offers new experiences. Those new experiences will result in a child with greater confidence, greater friendship groups, and perhaps better prepared for university. Okay, well, that's my quick tips, I think, for choosing and thriving at a sixth form college. Thank you all very much for your attention this morning. It's been a pleasure to speak with you. I think what I'll do now is I'll pass over back to Tori to see if there are any questions that we may be able to help you with.
Thank you. Thank you very much, both Martin and Julian, for those very sort of detailed presentations. Yes, we have had some questions coming in. One of the questions I'm going to start with, Julian, you talked quite a lot about how to compare the different sort of sixth form colleges and things to look for. Question, this is Martin, aimed more at you, because the question has come up about parameters that parents can use to compare, and particularly especially prep schools where they possibly don't have sort of published exit results. Is there any sort of recommendations or things to look at that you could add?
If you're talking about a prep school, it's a completely different world from the one that Julian and I have been talking about. There is no unit. There are no league tables for prep schools. There are certain measurements. I'm afraid that actually getting into a prep school is a lot harder because you simply have to be there. You need to walk through the place, even if you only do it virtually. The one good thing about prep schools is they don't normally hide who or what they are, but they have a very strong atmosphere. And it's this classic thing. You know your child. You know, if you're affording independent school fees, you're not a fool. Within 5 minutes of being in that school, you've got a pretty good idea of whether the two pieces of the jigsaw match. And that's what we're talking about. Your child is one piece of the jigsaw, the school is the other. You know whether it'll fit. So what I would say is, don't believe the league table. Well, do by all means look at the league tables. Do bear in mind, by the way, that people write their own league tables incredibly. The only league table that is reliable is the one produced by the Sunday Times newspaper in November under the parent power heading. And that is the only league table that you can rely on. Having said that, league tables, academic results, yeah, very important. But those schools, the prep schools, have their own very strong atmosphere. You know your child. Choose it on the basis of your heart, not your head. Never choose a school or a college on the basis of the figures or the facts. Go with their, you know. You have to love that school, and the school has to love your child. Go on emotion. That is probably advice that I will be shot for by all the professional organisations, but it's how I've chosen schools for my children, and by and large, it's never let me down.
That's great. Thank you very much. And so looking again at sort of that whole sort of parent choice, a question to both of you is, should I choose a school or a college for my son or daughter?
I'm going to reveal that I'm completely independent by saying, firstly, the obvious thing, it all depends on the child, you know. But more importantly, the only accurate judgment I can bring to these things is what I would do with one of my own children, or what I would do with my grandchildren. If I wished my son or my daughter to come over for a 2-year course, I would choose a college, not a school. The reason being, in other words, if you want your child to spend 5 years in the system, I would recommend a school. But if I was sending one of my own children for A-level or for IB or whatever, I would actually choose a college. Why? Everything Julian has said, the colleges are geared towards that new entry at the start. Schools, when students have been with each other for 3 years, can be very closed units. So it can be quite hard to break into the sixth form even in a large independent school. So my instinct would be to support Julian. And Julian, you haven't paid me to say that, actually.
Yeah, I must admit, I would say I agree, but I have seen a number of children who've come from overseas who have gone into the schools, and it can be done very, very successfully. If a child wants to go into the sixth form of a very good independent school, and in Cambridge there are many, it can work very well, but they do need to appreciate they're going into a school where the children already know each other. I think that's quite significant. So if they're gregarious, if they want that experience of coming in, it can work extremely well. I have, on the other hand, seen children for whom that's been very difficult. They couldn't break in to a student group that have known each other for a long time. And they didn't enjoy the isolation, of course. So just be wary of that. That can be a phenomenon. As it happens in Cambridge, there are a lot of schools that finish at age 16 anyway. So there are colleges that it's a bit more of a culture to change schools at 16 in the UK system as well, in where I am in Cambridge. But that's what I would be thinking about. Is your child, do they understand if they're going into the sixth form of a school, they're going into a school where people have been there for a long time, whereas it's a bit more of a level playing field for the college. So that's what I would support Martin on that.
Yeah, there is also the other issue, which is if you're a musician and you want to be in the orchestra, you know, if you're a sports player, you want to be in the soccer team, it is actually easier if you've been there from the start. Because you are, that word you used, I agree, Julian, it can work extremely well, but the child will have to break into an existing social and extracurricular network, and it can put an extra dimension on it.
Okay, thank you very much. So another question that were asked beforehand is, what are the signs that we should look out for that says that someone is a bad school or college? I know we spend our time focusing on kids, don't we?
Again, is it all right, Julian? I mean, I think Julian has actually mentioned one of the things, which is staff. The people who know that school far better than any prospective parents are the staff. If they are leaving in large numbers, that's a bad sign. And it's one of the sort of litmus paper tests. On average, it is perfectly normal for staff turnover to be between 5 and maybe even 10% of the staff. So it's absolutely okay if 5 or 10% of the staff are actually changing every year, because they will move on to promotion, they will retire, all the rest of it. Anything more than that, and you really do need to inquire. And I'm afraid I will make myself very unpopular among my fellow heads and say that actually I would ask that specific. I really would stick my neck out and ask that question. I think it's the one obvious hallmark. The other question to ask is, this again, other heads will shoot me for this. How many pupils have you expelled in the past 3 years? Schools are there to hang on to students. They're not there to kick them out. And the expulsion or exclusion, sometimes it's called expulsion, sometimes it's called exclusion, is also a very interesting figure. And I'm afraid I would be brave enough to ask the head.
Yeah, I would concur. I think, as you say, Martin, the staff know the school. And just to add, the reason staff turnover, it can seem high, 5–10%. It is part of the tradition and culture of being a teacher, is to change schools during the course of your career. That is the way that most teachers have a career. They move between schools. It gives them different experiences, and you then become a better teacher as you go through your career. Maybe you get a promotion, as Martin said, and you do that in a new school. The other point I'd mention to be careful about is the degree of transparency that a school or a college gives you. So is the website detailed about outcomes for the children, or does it say, does it what we call cherry pick? Does it only show you a couple of very nice stories and nothing else? And if it does, say, well, can I have all of the biology results for A-level for the past 2 years? Is that possible for me to see that? So transparency. Good schools will be very transparent, and they'll be proud of what they do, and they will love to show you. So that's another measure I would suggest to think about.
Okay, thank you very much.
May I offer just one very gentle warning? If you are shown around a school by a pupil, Young people are wonderfully loyal, and I have never known anybody who's been asked to be a tour guide for prospective parents who hasn't sung the praises of the school, because children are like that. It's one of the reasons why they're so nice. Your tour guide is not the person to ask if you're being shown around a school by a pupil. Stop and ask other pupils who haven't been chosen by the school what they think about it.
Great, yeah, very good advice. Thank you very much. And yeah, following the comments about staff turnover, I think a few people are coming through on the chat about how would they find out about that, and I'm right in saying that they would literally just have to ask the school directly.
Yes. I'm afraid that one of the awkward things about choosing schools is that an awful lot of parents were frightened of their headmasters. And when they walk into the head or the principal study, they become very shy and very nervous. Don't be, you are a customer. Ask the questions you need to ask. You're not going to be punished by the headmaster or indeed the principal.
That's great. Now, obviously, again, as parents, one of the things that we always ask is about sort of discipline. And again, a question that's come in about is how do schools in the UK deal with bullying at schools? And will a bully be asked to drop out from the school?
There's been more of an improvement in areas like this in the past 5 to 10 years in the UK than ever in the sort of history of UK education. All I would say quite genuinely is it is handled extremely well by schools now. And we're living in a world where virtually every school in the UK will have a zero tolerance approach to bullying. It is being handled far more sensitively, far better. Would a pupil be expelled if again, it all depends on the individual circumstances. But I would genuinely say that fear of being bullied should not be a factor in a parent thinking about educating their child in the UK. It is one of the areas where UK schools and colleges have become extremely good. I would have no fears about that at all.
Yeah, I would support.
Be handled appropriately.
It's very much something that's the education department in the country has been focused on over the last 10, 15 years. And it also includes a great emphasis on online bullying as well. There's a huge awareness that we now have about peer-to-peer children bullying each other through social media. So we're very aware of that dimension as well.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Just trying to see if we've got not too many more questions. One other question that we had beforehand was, how do schools help students to socialise and build friendships outside of the classroom?
Well,
yeah, go on, Julian.
Well, I was going to say, for us in the college sector, that is about, I mentioned the initial period where children join together. A good approach that can be taken is induction. So spending time before lessons start, days before lessons start, on bringing students together. A house system is often used in colleges, and it's very widely used in the schools, which gives children a sense of belonging to a smaller group within a larger school or college. Joining in is probably the most important message I have for children for this regard when they first come to the college. Sign up during the Freshers' Fair to the football team, the badminton, all the things that you've already done. Try some new things, and that is another very important driver of friendships, a common interest between children.
I think, dare I say, you're almost asking the wrong question, because it's not what do schools do. The question is, of the prospective parent must ask the school, what is your induction program? And if a look of startlement comes across the face of the head, that's probably not the school you want to send your child to. Every school should be able to tell you how they actually introduce their students to each other.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. I've just had another question that's popped up. Again, it's kind of going back a little bit about how sort of discipline and things are handled, which is a bit more about should a parent be worried if they know that there's been a complaint at their child's school about maybe sort of drug use or alcohol?
I think I would be more worried if there wasn't a complaint. I mean, young people are young people. They are going to experiment with alcohol. You know, I wonder, I mean, of course, I never did as a child. No, Perse at all. It's not whether incidents happen, it's how the school handles them. And for instance, the classic example would be, say, drug usage. Now, what parents are very often attracted by is the school that says, we here have a zero tolerance policy towards drugs. You know, any child who goes within 6 feet of marijuana will be expelled. That is fine until it's your child, actually, and then parental attitude. So what a school should do, for example, is if, for example, a child has smoked a joint once, for instance, and is found doing it, the majority of good schools don't expel a child for that single usage. What they do is they make the child undergo what do I want the word? They make the child have drug tests, random drug tests, and say that you will be expelled if any of those drugs tests prove positive. Now that is a tremendous line for schools to take, for the simple reason it gives the child the chance to say to their friends, no, I can't take part in this. It gives the child a socially acceptable reason. So what you're looking for isn't the number of incidents, you're looking for how the school handles it, basically. And you know, you're living in dreamland if you think that young people won't misbehave. Of course they will. Schools ought to be able to handle it. It's part of growing up, it's part of learning.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed. And then just sort of one final question that's just popped in a little bit about if parents complain about the ratio of international students to English students, should we be looking at this filter when choosing a school?
I would, but again, Julian, I wouldn't be concerned so much about the ratio of international students. I would be concerned if there was one particular group, one particular nationality that actually dominated, because it is so important that when these young people join a school, they actually spread their wings, they talk to other people. Where it goes wrong is where there is a large group of people, for instance, speaking one single language. Because these students are coming over to the UK, they are lonely, they're having to speak English, you know, they're having to speak a language they haven't spoken at home. They naturally gravitate towards speaking their own language to people from their own country. So what you're looking for is a mix of international students. That's the key thing.
Yeah, I would add as well that it's worth asking what the school or college does to perhaps break up if there is a nationality body there. So for example, it could be that the school chooses to put them in different tutor groups or forms, or perhaps different boarding houses to reduce any large single nationality, to avoid a clique forming of students speaking their home language. You may also want to ask how in a class environment that's addressed. Perhaps the school would like the children from same nationalities not to be sitting together in all lessons, to avoid the children whispering to each other. Other schools may say, well, actually, if that happens a little, we tolerate that as long as things that go out are in English. But it's worth just quizzing a little bit more what the reality is like for a school that have different nationalities, because it's a very easy measure to say, oh, I don't want a certain percentage, but actually even a school with a small percentage, if they're all from the same country, will give you a kind of a problem as well, I think. So it's not something that's necessarily straightforward, but ask how the school responds. You know, the other dimension here is what kind of environment do you want for the child? If it's a college, for example, where children are tend to go to top-ranked universities, then your child will be studying with other children like that. Where they're from then becomes entirely secondary.
And may I make a confession? I'm involved at the moment in trying to choose a school for one of my grandchildren. Therefore, I sort of come to this webinar rather more interested in this issue than I might otherwise have done. I have looked at 2 schools recently. One of those schools, you went into the dining hall and the tables were basically nationality tables. All the different nationalities sat on one table. That school we immediately wrote off. That was all I needed to see. The other school I went to, they actually had a rule, as you were saying earlier, Julian, you know, that in classes, at the meal table, things like this, that they did actually split up as part of school policy. It's so important.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you very much indeed. That pretty much wraps up all the questions that we've got. I mean, obviously, as we're saying, Julian and Martin have been sharing their knowledge with us today, which they've also put down in their wonderful book, An Overseas Parent's Guide to UK Education. I have put a link in the chat if any of you do want to go and find out more about the book. I think I can certainly say from hearing you both talk this morning that there is, yes, a sort of a wealth of experience there that you've we've been very fortunate for you to be able to share with us this morning. So thank you very much indeed.
May I just add on one extra thing, sorry, before we finish? Again, very carefully. Of course, a number of parents will use agents. But can I just say, as far as schools are concerned, they welcome the individual application just as much as they do an application. You do not need to go through an agent to apply to a UK independent school. And the schools are geared to individual applications. Sorry.
Thank you. Well, I was about to say, do either of you have any sort of final words that you'd like to say before we sort of finish today's session?
I would just like to thank everybody for coming along. With regards to agents, it's a little different in colleges. We tend to see the majority of students use agents, actually, but of course they can come directly. It's a little different. But yeah, thank you so much. Hope it was helpful.
Thank you, everybody. And
Okay.
best of luck.
Thank you very much, and goodbye.